government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Okay, welcome back everyone. Anonymous Bites back. This is already the fourth interview with David McBride, Australian whistleblower known for the Afghan files, and he is back with us again, and the last week has been super busy for him. He is going to update us a bit about that, and if you are listening from YouTube, get into the chat and ask whatever you want, and if we have the time then he can answer it for you. And to all of you I want to say, please help share it around. That's what we depend on. So. Okay, welcome back David.
Thanks Mark, great to be here.
Yeah, you told me about how busy you were last week, and so we scheduled it for today, which is actually our normal day, but yeah. So maybe you wanna update a bit about this situation.
Yeah, a lot's happened since we last talked, and it's been pretty good, and your listeners will be happy to hear that. I think the last time we spoke, I was down in Melbourne, which is one of our biggest cities, and there was an exhibition by a famous photographer, an Iranian girl, who took photos of me and other whistleblowers and had them made into sort of 3D images, a bit like Roman statues, and then photographed them again, and then had them on big billboards in the centre of the city, with a little story about why each person became a whistleblower. And that was good. It was very much for the general public, and I think that helps, that people begin to see it's not so much a sort of a niche area, but more and more general people are beginning to be uncomfortable about the fact that so many people who speak up about government wrongdoing are facing trial. I mean, if one of us is on trial, it's easy to think that, oh, well, that guy just hates the government, or that girl hates the government. But now I can think of about 10. You know, I'm quite excited to... in fact, there must be more like 20, to speak to Reality Winner's mother sometime in the future, but to say to her, look, you're not alone. I think all of the whistleblowers are making a bit of just enough force to say, look, there are so many of us that who joined the government organisations for the right reasons, to do good. We saw that what was going on was not what we were meant to be doing, and we spoke up. And I think if we get enough people standing in a line doing the right thing, we might get change. Speaking of which, the number one person, Julian Assange, we had a couple of rallies in Canberra in front of Parliament House last week, and I spoke at both, and I got a good reception to say, even though WikiLeaks is not directly linked to my case, it is the same thing. It is the same thing, because people were given the documents to Julian Assange. Were all like me, and there's a lot more of them. They're not being prosecuted, but they were all people that worked for the government, like Chelsea Manning and others who haven't been jailed, but we said, this is wrong. We're meant to be promoting truth and justice and the right thing, and we're actually doing the wrong thing. And we're running the so-called war on terror as if we're a corporation, and we need to change, and also we need to stop the lies. I like Julian Assange's quote to say, if wars are started by lies, perhaps peace can be started by truth. And that is that's pretty much the same. That's the essence of every whistleblower, and even some of them who were like one of them, for example, worked for an agency who was meant to help disabled people with autism. And again, she just saw the procedures were not being followed, and these sick people were being bullied and abused. There was someone else who saw that the refugees that we keep in camps off Australia, not unlike Guantanamo Bay, in the sense that we know if we bring them to mainland Australia, they will have certain rights. And so, in quite a cynical move by the Australian government, just like the US with Guantanamo Bay, we say, we won't take them to Australia. We'll take them to some third country, like New Guinea or Nauru. We'll pay that third country to hold them, and then they'll be in legal limbo. They won't have any Australian rights to have their refugee claim status looked at, and I don't believe they even have the rights of the island countries like Nauru and New Guinea. There's certainly not much scrutiny on them when they're in these camps, and a lot of terrible things happen. And Australia, again, as they did with me, they take the view that nobody is allowed to speak about what's going on. And even another whistleblower was a doctor in one of these refugee camps off Australia, a bit like a doctor in Guantanamo Bay, who said, we are mistreating these people according to international law. And again, the government didn't want to have an argument about it. The government prosecuted that doctor and said, you're not allowed to speak about this. And it goes right back to Assange to say the government fear the truth, and the government think it's fine to put people in jail for speaking the truth rather than actually fix the main problem. So to get back to where I started from, at least there is growing publicity for these number of these small cases, The Julian Assange rallies were well attended in Canberra. I think they're travelling all around the countryside with Julian's father, John Shipton, who I now know, and he's asked me to see if I've got any ideas that can help Julian in his appeal, because obviously, while it's nice that Julian's extradition was denied, there is a larger problem in that all of the US government's arguments about why journalists should go to jail were all accepted by the British judge, and we need to, in order to preserve WikiLeaks' legacy and in fact preserve WikiLeaks into the future and other organisations that want to do the same, we really need to overturn that judgment and to say, to speak the truth or to publish documents which show the government is committing crimes or suggest that they are. That can never be a crime in itself. To report a crime cannot be a crime. And we need to push that message all the way up to the Supreme Court in the UK, because that is a really important thing. I think even if Julian Assange is let out, unless journalism is exonerated, I don't think his life will be that easy, because wherever he goes, the Americans will still be trying to recapture him or harass him, and that won't be acceptable. We need the acts of what he actually did to be cleared, rather than just him being denied extradition on mental health grounds. One of the ways I hope to contribute to his appeal is to talk about an unknown area which probably not many civilians have such a good understanding of, not surprisingly, and that is this organisation called Five Eyes, which is the US, the UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, all these English-speaking countries, and they have joined together of intelligence sharing. So it sounds quite innocuous, but when you drill down to what it means, it actually means that for security purposes, those five nations are the one country. This is one of the reasons why the UK was always going to try to extradite Julian, in the sense that they don't see him publishing US documents as any different than if he published UK documents. In a sense, Five Eyes is not really a committee of nations joined together like you might see in Europe. It is actually the US having a number of satellite states, a bit like the old USSR. There's no real independence between the old USSR and Poland, for example, or Yugoslavia. They were all really satellite states of the Soviet Union, and now we have a similar body with Five Eyes, where Australia, Canada, and New Zealand are really just satellite states of the US as far as national security goes. That is, if you do anything in those five countries that the US doesn't like, you will be prosecuted. The government won't. The government of Australia, for example, won't say, well, they haven't committed a law against Australia. It's not something that we can see what the point the whistleblower is trying to make. There won't be any question. If you offend America, you offend all the Five Eyes countries, and that's a very dangerous thing. And it means this is why Julian is in such peril. It's why, even in my own case, which has nothing to do with Americans, it all has to do with war crimes by Australian personnel and the government attempts to cover them up. And yet, in secret, when I was in court, the lawyer for the Australian government announced that they had to get permission for the United States government to carry on the trial. Now, that's very strange to think that a sovereign nation like Australia, no matter how good our relationships are with America, that we would have to seek their permission to put someone on trial. It means that the Americans are really controlling Australian national security
Yeah.
from behind the scenes.
Yeah. Yeah, and so if you you mentioned the Five Eyes system, so you have different ways in which they gather intelligence, right? Right now we're dealing also with the whole big social media system where all the data is being collected and stored. That's part of it. That's what people call OSINT, open source intelligence. Whatever you put on social media can be used by these intelligence or by law enforcement because you published it yourself. They don't need a warrant or whatever. They can just collect it and it can be used against you. And you also have signal intelligence, which was kind of like rolled out, I think in the 90s already. You had different names for it. You had it first. You had like Echelon, Signal. Now it's called Signal Intelligence SIGINT, I think. Do you have all these ground stations where they tap the signals from the sky, satellite signals, phone signals, etc. I know in Europe at first, and this I think is important for law. In Europe after the Cold War, actually during when the Berlin Wall fell, right? The Stasi was before that. The Stasi was very famous for collecting phone calls and stuff, recording phone calls, getting people arrested for what they said on the phone. So so after that, there were very strong phone protections created, phone privacy protections, and that meant that all the communication you would do on your cable was like legally protected by privacy laws. So mobile phones, etc., they were not doing they weren't communicating through the cable but through the sky. And so the first thing these signal intelligence people did was actually focus on collecting all the traffic that went through the sky. It was not protected by the same phone protections we had in Europe, resulting from the Stasi time. And like technically, if you would go on the internet and you would use an internet modem, you would call in, just like with a phone, you would call in into the internet, and technically that was protected under privacy laws. But the traffic through the sky is not. So that's where they started focusing on, and now, of course, the phone traffic and everything is also monitored. But it's just what I wanted to mention real quick, how they circumvented privacy laws when they already started with that whole intelligence operation.
Yeah, no, they have no respect for it at all, and I think this is one of the big claims that, or the turning point for Edward Snowden was he knew that the US were doing bulk collection. That is what you just said, collecting every single email anybody sent, using artificial intelligence, of course, to looking for key words, but they were able to look at every single person in the US's private communications wherever they were, and they were doing this under the basis of 9/11. But what I think offended Snowden was the idea of the head of, I think it was the NSA. Your listeners will know this better than me, but came on national TV and said, "Oh no, we don't do that. How dare you? How dare you say that we would do that? As if we would ever do that." And Snowden knew he was lying. And it's not just about the collection, but the idea that one of the most senior people in the American government would go on television and lie to the public, that's a very bad sign. That's a sign, and not think that there was anything wrong with that. It's totally in breach of what what any democracy is meant to be standing for. That there's no accountability, and that they saw the public at large as their enemy. And you're right to talk about the privacy. And the Stasi is a good example because, and I think they deal with this in the movie about Snowden, when he tells his girlfriend, look, you've got to cover up your camera on your laptop because they can be accessed by the security services. And she's like, well, I've got nothing to hide. And I used to be like that too. As I said, I came from a service background. I came from a sort of law and order background, and I didn't think, well, if people want to bug my phone, or I didn't think that there'd be anything to hide. But the problem is, the government they don't necessarily play fair, and if they get all your emails, they can twist them. Even if you're the most law-abiding citizen, with a few lawyers and a few policemen, they could pretty much mount a prosecution against anybody as a result of gathering their emails. They could be quite innocent, but they can be made. You can be made to look like you're a terrorist as a result of the compilation of selective things. And even if you don't ultimately go to jail, they can make your life a misery as a result of charging you and keep you out of circulation for 5 years. And in the reality, they may only be doing that because you're an activist and that you're against the government. And so they can manufacture a case against you on spurious grounds using information that they've effectively stolen. And it gives them the ability to actually, a bit like they've done with me. I mean, it's quite clear that reading between the lines is I am just someone who thinks the government has overstepped the law, and yet they can treat me like a terrorist. And had there not been people like yourselves or media who are interested in my case, I could easily just be put in jail as a secret prisoner. In fact, that as I think we've spoken about it, that did happen to someone in Australia who was put in jail after a secret trial where his name wasn't even mentioned. They gave him a fake name for the purposes of the trial, so no one would find out who he really was. The trial was held in closed doors. He was even jailed in secrecy, where the head of the jail, the governor of the prison, didn't know he was actually a former security officer for the government put in jail. He was put in jail under some sort of assumed story. And now that's pretty scary because, if this continues, we're becoming like George Orwell's 1984, where people are being put in prison for different reasons than is what has been made public. And we don't even actually know for sure that there aren't any more people in Australian prisons under secret charges with secret names. The only reason anyone found out about this particular guy was that he tried to write a book and his book got confiscated, and someone who was visiting another prisoner who was an author found out about this book getting confiscated, and he started making inquiries, and it was only by accident that the existence of this secret security prisoner was found out. And this is in Australia, where where we have, it's meant to be a sort of a very freedom-loving place, and so you can imagine that there's a lot more people under secret trials in the US. Certainly, there's people like Thomas Drake, and there's other people who were working for the CIA, whose names I I can't quite remember, but they were put up in front of the espionage courts and convicted under very spurious circumstances, where they said we were trying to expose wrongdoing within the security organisations, but there was no one listened to whether there was any wrongdoing or not, and they were just put in jail for even trying to do the right thing. We've got a few cases like that in Australia where a guy who worked for the equivalent of the CIA, our spying agency overseas, had to bug the cabinet rooms of another country in East Timor, a very poor country, and this spy didn't think it was the right thing to do because it was really ultimately for the benefit of an Australian oil company. And he made a complaint about it, and not only is he facing jail, but his lawyer's facing jail. Even though the Australian government obviously is the one that should be, his actions should be being scrutinised, it's the people that speak out about it who bear the brunt. And anyway, I guess we know all that. But the good thing is we are getting publicity, and if we keep it up, there may be some sort of a change in trajectory in these very authoritarian moves by Western governments.
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid point. You saying you finally get some publicity in the sense that they have these events where the normal people who are probably not aware of it yet are confronted by what's actually going on, what whistleblowers do, what you yourself have been doing. And when I talk to people in the streets, they I even mention the Assange situation, they don't know much about it, to be honest. And even the Assange situation, which to us is so famous, and in the activist community everyone knows about it, but normal people on the street, they don't know much about it. When the second you start explaining them what's actually going on, then you never meet anyone who is not on your side, or who is not on the side of the whistleblowers. They are so shocked by how these people treat a journalist like Assange, or how they treat whistleblowers. And that's the thing, when you say Five Eyes and they are all watching us, and what we need is more publicity. I think that is crucial. Everyone, if they're aware of it, is actually choosing the right side. They just need to be aware of it. So we need a billion eyes on them.
You're right, and that's probably the key thing, because and I noticed that during my case, I had years of speaking to journalists and failing to get them that interested. You'd say it's government corruption at a high level, and we're starting wars unnecessarily, and their eyes would glaze over and they go, oh well, the government's corrupt. We all know that. Yeah. But if you speak to normal people, as you said, if I used to speak to people at bus stops and at McDonald's and former soldiers and farmers, they kind of got it. And I said, well, what? They said, well, what's it all about? And I said, well, I was a soldier, and what I saw was wrong. I made a complaint about it, and now they're trying to put me in jail. And people go, well, that's ridiculous. And I go, yeah. And the average person does get it, but you're right. When I see it with Julian Assange all the time. And we need to be honest about it, in the sense that he's not that popular, or the reality is most people don't care about him, and we need to acknowledge that fact. I was quite shocked once. I was speaking to an older lady who's like a distant relation of mine, and she's probably 70 years old, and her mother was from Europe, Eastern Europe somewhere, Hungary or Poland, and her mother survived the Holocaust. and so you'd think that they would be very up on human rights, and they would be very affronted by the Julian Assange case. But I said to her, she said, "Oh, I've got no sympathy for Julian Assange. He's a narcissist." And it was just struck me as quite funny, because she was sort of, in every other way, you would say she was a small L liberal, but they kind of, a lot of people buy into Julian's appearance, and they think he's, or the smear campaigns, and they don't kind of think this is bad, that someone who was really just trying to expose wrongdoing, like an evil corporation that's selling poisonous products as health food. He's really not a bad person. He made great sacrifices on his own life in order to improve the world, and yet people will judge him on all sorts of grounds which are not relevant to the fact that what he was essentially doing was a very good thing. And it's funny, but we do have to get the message out. This is one advantage I've got, and it's kind of, the evolution of the whistleblower. Well, there's others as well, but they're less well known. People like Thomas Drake, and people within the system. But I've got an advantage in that I was Julian is a kind of a brilliant guy who could see issues, even though he did do hacking for the police force at some stage, I think, as and then he helped them sort of find pedophiles, so he's not totally outside the system. He was happy to do good, and if people asked him to help them with busting criminals, he was happy to do that. And anyway, but that's not the way he's portrayed. Edward Snowden, it was closer to a sort of a mainstream guy. He wanted to join the army. He got a back injury. He was a contractor for the CIA, and he was very much, he was like me. He probably, he came from a government background. I think his parents worked for the government, so he was hardly. And he would say himself, I was trying to uphold the US Constitution. I'm not a terrorist against America. I was actually trying to make sure that the people in our own government follow the law. And I'm a kind of a step even closer, in that I was a uniformed guy. I wore a uniform. I went to Afghanistan. I held a gun. I'm a lawyer. I generally wear a suit and tie in public. I'm hardly an anarchist or anything that is against the government. And I'm saying what we are doing is wrong. I'm saying that we are not following our own procedures. And I'm not even, I'm not anti-military. I'm not anti-war so much, but I'm anti-lies. And we need, everything falls down if we go to war for lies, and if we carry on wars for lies. And hopefully, and luckily in Australia, we've got more people who are quite mainstream. While we don't know the identity of the spy who's just known as Witness K, he was a spy for the Australian government, and his identity is still secret. But we know the identity of his lawyer is a guy called Bernard Collaery, and he's a step even closer to the establishment than I am, in that he was a parliamentarian. He was like the Attorney General of a state. He never goes anywhere without a coat and tie. And yet he says what we're doing is wrong. He says we are breaking the law and we are disgracing our nation. So we're getting a bit of an evolution where people, it's not people outside the government that are criticising the government, it's people within the government who are saying, wow, we're not following our own rules, and it does matter. Even if we say we're fighting this kind of clash of civilizations and we need to be aware of terrorism, as I've said before, we are creating more terrorists by our lies. if we put people in jail unnecessarily, and uh, if we throw away our legal procedures in order to do that, to put away people who are just like me, who are really just activists against the government, if we start putting them in jail as if they're terrorists, we're actually creating more terrorists, and we are becoming the world's bad guys. And who wouldn't want to fight us? And why wouldn't they want to fight a totalitarian regime that doesn't follow the law, that goes to war for the benefit of corporations' profits, and who puts anybody who speaks up against it in jail? I mean, we are becoming everything that we say we hate.
Yeah, yeah. No, exactly. I think what you're saying is very important. People from inside the system speaking out, seeing that their own institutions are not doing the right thing, and that they're abusing their authority. And but then you have the thing like they need to be able to safely expose this, to safely make this known to the public, and that is where your case comes in. You actually tried to do that through all the right institutions, and they pretty much, yeah, said told you to go away until you had to go to the media.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a bit like there was another case which, because writing my statement, I think about what I'm going to say in court, because obviously they're going to cross-examine me. But there was another, it doesn't sound as bad, but there was another incident where the government, it was an election, and the government misused taxpayer funds. They probably do it in Europe as well, where they want to win a particular seat in an election, so they get a lot of taxpayer funds, and they spend the taxpayer funds only on those electorates that they want to win, and then they try and win. They try and buy the people, basically buy key people with taxpayer funds by not applying the rules about how taxpayer funds are going to be met. If they really need to win a particular seat, they'll go and build a hospital in that seat and a bridge, whether or not they need a new bridge or need a new hospital, and they'll start pouring money into places which is really an attempt to win votes with government money, which they're not allowed to do, but they do that, and they got caught out in Australia, and by the press. The only reason they got caught out was, well, someone within the government, like me, wrote a report and said this is wrong. But of course, that could have vanished without a trace. Luckily, the press picked up on it. And the media said, what about this report that says that spending was illegal? And what the government did was they did an inquiry into this illegal spending. But of course, they chose the inquiry officer from within the sort of government ruling party's officers, and he was like their trusted he was a guy that worked with them, and of course he did an inquiry and he said basically it's all fine. And that was what I was facing. I mean, I when every time I made a complaint, I could see something wasn't right. I could see we were investigating people as a kind of a smokescreen. We're investigating people that had committed no crime, and we were covering up murders. And this was in order to keep the media placated. We would investigate someone who had done nothing wrong, and I'm sure they do it in Europe as well. If you want to look tough and win the population over, you might put someone from a minority group in jail. Find an immigrant, especially an Islamic one, and put them in jail or make some. And that looks like you're doing something. In the meantime, there are much bigger crimes going on which you don't investigate because they're too hard or for whatever reason. In Australia, I think that the reason they didn't investigate some people was because they were famous and they didn't want to have a trial of a famous person. So they found some small people that were trying to put in jail. And I complained about it. And you're right. And they just fobbed me off. And it was a bit like, they knew no one ever said that I was wrong, but they would say things like, look, that's above your pay grade. You don't understand. There's a big picture going on here. And, this is all part of the big plan. We're going to put this guy in jail. He's going to be a scapegoat. We're going to not investigate this other guy because he's famous and that will cause problems. We're going to draw it out for as long as we can. Probably no one will ever end up going to jail, but we're going to make a big smoke and mirrors. And you don't understand that, so you just need to shut up and let us get on with our secret plan. And yeah, there was after making those complaints, even when I made them, I had a feeling that they weren't going to go anywhere. But as I said to you a couple of weeks ago, I needed to make them to protect myself. You need to make internal complaints first. I went and saw the police. In fact, the very first people I saw was the police. As I said, if you get the chance, it's always good to phone up a confidential hotline because then you're protected. And luckily the police were very ethical and honest in my case. And while they didn't take it further, at least they recorded that I went to them first. And they have on record, in my case, to say he went to the police, 2 years before he saw the journalists. And so there was plenty of time for them to actually look into what I said. And eventually, but of course, internal inquiries by organisations which are rotten will almost certainly come up with nothing. And you need the media to put a bit of pressure on the organisation to make things happen. I mean, even in Julian Assange's case, even though he published all these documents and the media got hold of them, there was still no one in the US government was ever brought to account for the sort of things that he discovered. And not just the US government, but other governments, even with the media. I mean, he made a good go at it, and there was a chance at something. But without the media, he'd probably be murdered by now and disappeared somewhere. But he would have been extraordinarily rendered to some sort of country where they don't have any laws, and then he just would have been treated as a terrorist. And the media did give him some sort of protection. And the media, well, eventually, his case is not obviously finished yet, even after the trial is not completely finished. And hopefully, while it is very slow, there will be some sort of a justice. But you need to make an internal complaint. But there will never be any great changes in government without pressure from the media. If you look at right back to Daniel Ellsberg's case, the Pentagon Papers, the Watergate story. These were all people that were not happy about what was going on, and they were not getting any traction. I mean, imagine if Daniel Ellsberg, he probably did, but if he complained to the US Secretary of State that they were lying about the Vietnam War, obviously, they would have just ignored him. They would have just said, well, thanks for your opinion, but we know, like in my case, there's a big picture thing going on here. You don't necessarily need to know about it, and we don't really care whether you think we're doing the wrong thing. It was a different story once the government was embarrassed, once the stories got into the Washington Post and the New York Times. And that's what I was relying on as well. I mean, I made the internal complaints. They were ignored because the problems were at the very top, and of course they were going to ignore them. But I had to go to the media because otherwise nothing was going to change. These organisations did not have the ability or intention to fix themselves. It was working for them, and without pressure from the media, obviously nothing was going to change. The problem I get is, of course, now I'm facing trial and possible prison. But I accept that, and even if I have to go to prison, because I will always say I did the right thing, and I will always maintain that if I hadn't gone to the media, nothing would have happened. And I can now that it's good for me to verbalise it with you, because I can say, well, just imagine I didn't go to the media. What would have happened? Would there have ever been war crimes inquiries? I don't think so. Would there have ever been any positive change? I don't think so. I can't see how that would have happened when there was no attempts. Oh, I might have to go now. I think have to check out of my hotel room.
Ugh.
Hi, I'll just be a few minutes.
Yeah, it's always a thing. Yeah, no, I think the real big shock came when they like raided ABC, right?
Yeah, that's right. Well, they raided the ABC. They raided my house first. They raided the ABC a few minutes later, or a few. Actually, it was about a year later. We're not really sure quite what that's about, because they had all the documents, I think, that they needed. But still, yeah, that was actually lucky for me, because again, it shows you the power of the media.
Mm.
Until they raided the ABC, people didn't know much about my case. I was charged simply with theft documents, and I guess people could think I was a bad person. I was stealing things from the Defence Force.
Yeah.
But it was actually, I was not a thief. I had to take documents in order to give them to the journalists. But that made me look bad. But that's just the way it is. But yeah, the raids on the ABC helped my case, because then luckily there was I think the first time I've ever seen it, but the mainstream media unanimously supported me, because they all said, you can't put journalists in jail, particularly ones who work for the mainstream media. And this should actually all help Julian Assange, because the government eventually agreed with him. And that raiding the ABC backfired for the government,
Yeah.
because that started to bring it home to the average person that this was not about, bad people, spies or whatever, but this was about stories and journalists and things that we take for granted each day, and they were being treated like terrorists. And luckily, the charges against the journalists were all dropped, but it did start to bring it home to people that this was not normal, and this was not truly any attempt to protect national security. This was just an attempt to protect government popularity and to stop people publishing stories that the government didn't like, even if those stories exposed terrible wrongdoing.
Okay. Hey, you mentioned you don't have much time left. You have to like check out and stuff. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to have to go. Or soon, but we could.
Just real quick,
yeah,
maybe want to give some updates on your case, because you've been super busy with it. I mean, you've been talking about all these other people and all their rights, but maybe a little bit about your thing. I mean,
well,
if you want.
that's right. The tempo's gone up, and to misquote Winston Churchill, it's kind of like it's the not the beginning of the end, but it's the end of the beginning. And it is 6 weeks to go before I'm in court for the case proper to start. I've had to write my witness statement last week, and that will be submitted. It might be made public. As soon as it is, I'll send it to you. And I have to start getting in my head preparations for being cross-examined on my statement, and there's the prospect of jail. So yeah, the tempo has definitely increased. The kind of the ending, one way or other, is coming in a matter of weeks. And so yeah, it's. I hope your listeners or whatever can stay engaged with it. It will be seems to have been going on forever, but it won't. It'll be soon that I'll be in court, and soon that that things will be heating up a little bit.
Okay. Okay, and what? Okay, and now one last question, and then I'll just leave you alone. And that is, what can people do to help you right now?
There's a petition going around. You could sign that petition to have the charges dropped. That all helps. There's a GoFundMe campaign which I've got to raise money for my lawyers. I've got a good legal team now, but it's quite expensive to keep them all going.
Oh, yeah.
It's called 50 Years in Jail for Whistleblowing on the ADF. I'd be grateful for any support, and even small amounts, because it just shows solidarity. But and as you said from the beginning, the greatest way people can really help is to circulate and to talk about the case. That really helps me, and to send me good wishes. I mean, that really helps. I do still get down sometimes, and when you hear people send you a nice message, it really makes you feel great. Helps you have strength to go on.
Yeah, that's really what you need, right? I mean, just for people to show that they're aware of it and that they're on your side. That gives you a lot of power, a lot of strength to fight on, because you are dealing with.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, you're dealing with this hostile establishment which has like complete control over certain big media, and they make it seem like everyone is against you, but in reality, that's not true, of course.
Yeah, that's right. And when I'm in a good mood and I've got support, I feel I can actually go to jail if necessary and handle it. But you're right, the government can make it feel like you're a pariah and you're on the outer, and you can get very down. But yes, with support you can handle it. So that's a great way to help.
Okay. Okay, well, thanks anyway for coming on. I appreciate it, and yeah, just do your stuff. I mean.
Well, maybe we'll speak next week.
Yeah, of course.
Again, as I said, it always makes me feel good to speak to you and your listeners, and thanks for caring.
Of course, yeah, and yeah, we'll just do it again next week, and we'll see if we can give some more updates about the situation. And, of course.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be more updates.
Yeah.
And there'll be more things I can think of.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah. Okay. Well, thanks anyway, and then we'll talk next week.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks all the listeners.
Have a good night. Have a good day.
Okay. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, and to all the listeners, I want to say thanks, everyone, and please help to share it around. Now, since I'm done here with the interview, many of you are interested in the Assange case. Jump on the recap of the Close for Assange events at Slow News Day. They're recapping everything that happened during the street protests. Find them on just type on YouTube Slow News Day. Find the Action for Assange stuff, or go on their Rockfin. There's also Slow News Day, and you'll find them there. And they're talking right now, and I promised Glory I would give them a shout out, so I hereby am doing that. So since I'm done here, just jump on there and get informed. David McBride is an Australian whistleblower. The Assange situation deals with a whistleblower platform. Right now we're all in the same boat in that sense. We are defending journalists and whistleblowers around the world, and it is crucial that we tune things up and we do whatever we can to amplify their voices. We're doing it not for ourselves, we're doing it for everyone. These are free press, free speech, the freedom of expression and the freedom of assembly, the freedom of education. All these things are right now being threatened by this. I mean, without a free press and without the information we need, and without people to speak out freely, and without people to being able to expose the corruption and the crimes going on within this establishment, we are unable to educate ourselves about what goes on around us in the world. We're unable to make the right decisions. Like, even our democracy is under threat if we don't know what we're voting for. We don't know what these people do because they aren't being held accountable. If there is not a free press, no one is holding them accountable. So that is the issue we have, and right now there are so many of our rights at stake here that the only option we have is to fight back, or as Julian said, we have to resist, right? And we will. So, and as David also explained, and as I also said just during the interview, the people we speak to on the streets, when you inform them, they're almost always they almost always show solidarity with the situation. They almost always are on your side because they understand that it is wrong what is going on. The only problem we have is the mainstream, the controlled media, is not explaining anything to them, is not educating them on it, and they're unaware of what goes on. So, but the second they become aware, they are on our side. So the most important thing we can do is make sure everyone becomes aware, and then our numbers will grow, and we at some point reach critical mass, and this critical mass can no longer be ignored by the authoritarians who attempt to control us. So in that sense, I want to thank everyone for listening, and keep that in mind. Educate people around you. Your friends and your family, the closest ones to you, are the people most willing to listen to you. They can educate their friends about things and spread it around among your people close to you, and make sure that we become this movement that can't be stopped anymore. And I'll just remind you guys again, we have an Action for Assange thing going on right now, a recap of the Globus for Assange protests. Support them, and have a good evening.